So, one of the types of drama that we talk about here, and one that we're reading, is modern drama, which is you're much different than, say, Shakespeare or some of the Edwardian dramas. There's a lot of drama for many many years that stayed in a rather set form, and then we moved into the era of modern drama, which would be kind of the latter half, beginning and latter half of the 20th century, and of course on into now. And it took a completely different twist in many ways than drama had taken before. The idea of realism took hold, that it wasn't escapism, that you weren't seeing unrealistic characters in unrealistic settings and unrealistic costumes, but that you were actually seeing characters and settings that were trying to be representative of real life, which became, of course, in some ways even more dramatic than the kind of more fantasy things that had happened before. If you're trying to show actual people acting the way that actual people act, that can be pretty dramatic. And it really changed how it looked, because real life problems, like you can find plays about alcoholism, child abuse, spousal abuse. You can find plays that have things that poverty or really intersect real life, rather than kind of the fantasy settings. Even it doesn't mean all plays were happy up to that. I mean, Shakespeare wrote many many tragedies, but they had more of that feel of unreality. They weren't the kind of things that were happening in your life. And then the playwrights began writing the kinds of things that they were trying to really show real life on the stage. And that was a departure from what had happened in, in the back, in the past. Back in the past, I guess, is what I was trying to say. This moved into, or an off branch of realism, is naturalism. Naturalism, and this is also in literature. About the same time, there was around the 1900s. There was the school of naturalism. Writers of naturalism. This says that human behavior is determined more by instinct than by reason, and also has the idea that your future is probably determined by your biology, like the place you were born into, the circumstances you were born into. You didn't have much hope of overcoming your circumstances. You didn't have much hope of overcoming where you were born. And if you can imagine that being the case, naturalism is pretty depressing. If you read books that are of the naturalist tendencies. Trying to think of something like The Awakening, if you've read that by Kate Chopin, that has the idea of naturalism. All of a sudden, they were writing things that just were definitely not escapism. They're depressing, they're sad, but these writers felt like they were being much more realistic, and that people wanted to see real things depicted on the stage rather than more of the fantasy world. Personally, I'd rather see that fantasy world. I go there for escape. But for those writers, they wanted to reflect real, gritty life. And so naturalism ends up being a little bit more depressing most of the time than maybe the things that had been brought to the stage in the past. And since that time, experimental theaters, all kinds of experimental theaters and experimental types have been done. There's been, theater where there's no props, theater in the round, theater where people are asked to come down from the stage and participate. There's theater of the absurd. If any of you have read the play Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, it's about the characters Rosencrantz and Guildenstern when Shakespeare didn't write anything for them. So it's not about what the actors are doing when there's nothing, but it's about what the characters themselves are doing. And of course, when Shakespeare had parts of the play where Shakespeare didn't write a part for these characters, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, the characters are completely lost. They don't know what's going on. They're fragmented. They're disconnected from their world. And this kind of absurdism, Waiting for Godot, there's been many different types of experimental theater over the years since about, well, maybe the 40s on. Several of those are discussed in your book. But if you've been to some of those types of theater, you'll know it because they are nothing like traditional theater. So, theater has taken, if you talk about modern theater, it's taken a lot of twists and turns, and you never know. I mean, almost anything goes in these different types of experimental theater. So, if you've ever seen one of those, I mean, they can be a lot of fun. They can also be very confusing. So the play Trifles is more of the definitely the more of the modern theater. When you're reading that, you can see a lot of the subplot and things that are going on there. That's a little different than older plays. If you go past into the past for the types of plays such as Shakespeare would have been writing, and on up through those times. So I hope you're enjoying both kinds, though, modern and older theater.